Speak the charm of make, charm of make, charm of make, charm of make.
There will come a time on the planet Earth when science and technology will be long forgotten, when wizards will rule the world.
This is the Arnemancy Podcast. The world is weirder than we know. Join your host, Reverend Eric, and his diverse array of amazing guests in an exploration of tarot, magic, the occult, and the history of Western esotericism. The Arnemancy Podcast exists thanks to the support of generous listeners like you. Please consider supporting this podcast for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy. Welcome back to the show, everybody. I am here today with my friend and returning guest, Michael Sanborn, who is a book designer and translator that you have probably heard on the podcast before. And if you haven't, you should go back in time and listen to those episodes because they were really good and very fascinating and probably will make excellent background for this episode. So Michael's a book designer and a translator. He has wide-ranging spiritual interests, and we're talking today about his about the 6th translation he's done of a Remy Boyer book. I believe all the other times we've talked in the past, it's always been about Remy Boyer stuff. So you're sort of continuing with your passion. But I'm sorry. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, it's true. This is the 3rd time we've talked about my translations of Remy Boyer, but this is a very different piece of work.
It really is.
Yes. He has described himself as a bridge between the artistic avant-garde and the initiatory traditions. Mm-hmm. The books that I've translated up to this point and that we've talked about have related to the initiatory traditions with a certain eye towards artistic sensibility. Mm-hmm. This is his principal book, where he is taking the perspective of the artistic avant-garde with an eye to the initiatory traditions also. Mm-hmm. But this gives it a completely different orientation. And whereas his previous books may have been relatable to other books of a traditionalist nature, this book is totally different than anything else, at least I've ever seen before. Mm-hmm. And it might be different from anything that anyone else in the English language has ever encountered.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's back up a little bit and talk a little bit about Remy Boyer. So what originally drew you to his work?
Well, I've told the story a few times, but in short, I came across a trove of esoteric documents, and I was sorting them according to noise level, because there's noise and there's signal. Yeah. And I found something that, despite it being a garbled translation, I could see immediately was a synthesis of these different paths that are very interesting to me. Gnosticism, non-dual traditions, especially of the Eastern kind, but not only Eastern, the Gurdjieffian Fourth Way tradition, but all not just a mishmash, but put together in a single unified vision. And I immediately thought, well, this is something that I have to investigate further. There wasn't even an author listed in the document, just the half translation of half of an original text. But I was able to, with sufficiently rigorous Googling, discover that the author was Remy Boyer and that it was from a French publication with I won't try to say the French title out loud, but Awakening and Incoherism. Mm-hmm. So I purchased the book from an online French bookseller and worked with a French translator to create an English version of it. Mm-hmm. And along the way, I was comparing what the translator was doing on her own and what I was getting through computer translation and realized it's like if I compare them, I see how computer translation has to be edited to make a final product. And so on one hand, I sent the English translation to Remy Boyer through a contact form I found online, and it began my conversation with him, my dialogues with him, eventually leading to a suggestion that these translations could be published. And the other thing is that I went on and translated other texts by him for my own enjoyment. And then one thing led to another, and here we are with a 6th published book.
Well, I remember way back before we ever talked about podcasting, when we were just hanging out and drinking kava.
Yeah.
You gave me sort of it was like a pamphlet-sized translation of some Masonic stuff that you had done that I think was Rémi Boyer. That was kind of early on, I think, before you ever finished a book.
That was a draft of the first book.
Okay.
Yeah, Freemasonry as a Way of Awakening.
That's right. Yeah.
And I had done that for my own enjoyment, sent that draft pretty much exactly as I gave it to you to Rémi Boyer, and he went, "Oh, this is good. Do you want to publish it?" And that's where we began.
Okay, so the latest book is called The Way Without Masters, in syzygy with... Oh, wait. No, that's not part of the title. It's called The Way Without Masters, a collection of non-dualist texts. And it's by Remy Boyer, in syzygy with Sylvie Boyer Camax.
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 Okay. Yeah, it almost sounds like an English pronunciation, but as far as I've been able to tell, that is how that name is pronounced in the part of France that it comes from.
Cool. Well, I don't know that I have any listeners in France, but I'm sure that I have some French-speaking listeners who are furiously penning me an email right now. But I do want to mention, so like in the past, we've always been recording in your dining room here. And in the past, we've always had kava, but today we are drinking yerba mate. So there might be some clinking of glasses and stuff, but it's not. I don't want the audience to think that we're just like chugging huge amounts of kava. Instead, our hot beverage is something else.
I do want to say a word for the imported cacao that we had on one occasion.
Oh, right.
It was so pure and so strong that it was practically unaltered chocolatey state.
Yes. Yes, I forgot about that. Okay, so let's get into this book a little bit. We're going to have to start by talking about some definitions because, you're calling it a collection of non-dualist texts. Can you talk a little bit about what dualism is, how it maybe relates to or compares with monism, and give us a little bit of your feelings about it? I know that it's a huge, difficult topic, and everybody who studies this stuff probably has a different answer, but let's hear yours.
And you want to take a tour through monism before going on to non-duality?
Well, I feel like before you count 2, you must count 1, but before 1, what do you count?
Ooh, getting a little Kabbalistic. So let's take the moment of experience in the present. We ordinarily, or say conventionally, regard ourselves as being inside ourselves, inside our head, say, or if you have a different kind of constitution, maybe inside our hearts. And there's all this stuff out there. I'm in here. Everything else is out there. Under some circumstances, deep meditative experiences, psychedelic experiences, near-death experiences, there can be an insight that division between inside and outside is itself a construction of the mind, a projection of the imagination. And if that is strong enough, that can be a life-changing insight. like discovering that you'd been living in a house of mirrors. And then you can walk out of the carnival altogether, having had that glimpse. So, but that division between in and out, that's duality.
Okay.
And we ordinarily or conventionally live as if that is reality.
Mm-hmm.
And one could, on first consideration, suppose that, well, if that is not true, then the underlying reality is one. Is that actually everything is one. And that is my understanding of monism.
Yeah, I think that feels like a pretty good understanding of monism. Sort of, I mean, it's funny you mentioned Kabbalah, because I did take that quote from a Kabbalistic book. But Kabbalah even sort of waffles between monism and dualism, where there are times, certain Kabbalistic texts sort of seem to interpret the mystical experience one way and certain interpret it the other way, and some, like the Sefer Yetzirah, sort of like squish them together in an interesting manner. And you see it, I think, in almost every mystical path that doesn't include some kind of orthodoxy, right? Like even in like the Corpus Hermeticum, some of the texts in that book are monist and some are dualist. So yeah, I think that is a good way of looking at it. I think that's a good introduction.
So, but it's important to move on beyond that.
Okay.
Because especially in the Eastern traditions, specifically Advaita, mm-hmm. which I'm led to believe means not to. It's important that it's phrased that way, because we are not trying to assert a thing that is one that is true, such that what is not one or what is many is something that is not true. That it's reifying something mm-hmm. that from a non-dual point of view is unnecessary to reify, that you have a closer correspondence with reality if we, instead of saying all is one, we say it is not many.
Okay. All right.
You're not reifying oneness in that case.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the important distinction, I believe, between monism and non-dualism.
Okay. Monism and non-dualism.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then dualism. Well,
we started with dualism.
Right. These are literally non-dualist texts.
Yes.
So,
and you mentioned monism, so we had to take a detour.
We had to, because you have to... Yeah, you have to, because non-dualist sounds like it's going to be monist just on the surface, but it's not. It's just not dualist. All right, and so like, you sent me a little sample of some of the poems and texts in here, and it started off with this definition of philosophy, incoherism, which like immediately when I read the title, the first thing I thought was like, oh, like Dada. I was totally expecting some sort of like surrealist Dada-esque journey, but it wasn't. It was something else. And as I was saying before we started, the more I looked at it, the more I realized that I would have to sit and think about this for a long time to even be able to put forward any sort of definition myself. But you have spent a lot of time with this. Can you give us a little description of what incoherism is?
Well, I think that your instinct that there's a commonality with Dada and surrealism is right on. Remy is definitely calling back to that French European cultural manifestation mm-hmm. of artistic movements that are out to transform the world.
Right. Okay.
A Dada, futurism, surrealism, mm-hmm. and others. But the roots of the term, I believe, Remy Boyer never writes about this, but my research suggests. There was a movement in the Belle Époque in the late 1800s in France. Calling it a movement is too strong a word. There was a phenomenon. There was a thing that happened of a parody of art movements called the incoherists.
Okay. Oh, so it is.
But there wasn't an incoherism. There was this festival of the incoherent arts.
Okay.
And it was supposed to be a joke, and yet artists got involved, and there was amazing creativity in it. And then they had to do it again. And I think for maybe 3 years, they had it going on, and it was surrealism before surrealism, Dada before Dada, the theater of the absurd before the theater of the absurd.
It was the prequel of the absurd.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. Very good. And but at a certain point, the joke got old, and they just moved on and did other things.
Right.
But there's still records, prints and journals and things that show what it was. It was very active. I'm reminded kind of in spirit of the Discordians and the Church of the Subgenius, but 130 years earlier.
Well, maybe I mean, I think the first Discordian stuff was early 60s, late 50s.
Right. So in that case, 70, 80 years earlier. Yeah.
It's fascinating that kind of is there a good umbrella term for all that? I'm going to call it absurdism. But I think absurdism is already a thing, isn't it?
Or a kind of artistic antinomianism.
Okay, there we go. It's fascinating that sort of artistic antinomianism. That kind of artistic antinomianism. I'm never going to be able to say that word. But it's continued and sort of like popped up in different forms and different shapes over and over and over again in the 19th and 20th centuries. I mean, I guess in a way, like if you look at it in a broader cultural context, it's great that kind of stuff started to become available and seen as a valid and non-dangerous form of expression in Europe. I mean, they exist. So much of Europe existed under a stranglehold of philosophies for so long. Like I'm happy that we broke out.
But I'm not sure that it was seen as non-dangerous everywhere.
Yeah.
The surrealists in particular had this revolutionary spirit. It wasn't just a style of art. It was attempting to change humanity's relationship to the subconscious and to remove the barriers between the dream world and the daily world. And whether they meant it or not, they acted like they meant it, and it was very confrontational. Yeah, and that was the fun.
Yeah, I guess that does make sense. I mean, it's like the Discordians have Operation Mindfuck.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same thing. Yeah.
Just that the human spirit rebels against the constraints put on it by the intellect. And this is essential to the idea of incoherism, which is a coinage of Remy Boyer's, even if it got called back to the incoherent fests of the 19th century. That if we understand the conventional reality to be a construct of the mind, a construct of the imagination, then it's only natural to feel a drive to liberate ourselves from that construction, to imagine differently, and also to take back our identity and our sense of the real away from the products of our imagination.
I like that a lot. It is, I mean, I think, as you know, as we've discussed before, I'm really fascinated by the way that imagination has been kind of imagined and reimagined in Western culture. I mean, from image magic through advertising, through propaganda, through all the sorts of stuff. Like, images are basically the way that our experience of reality is formed. But we are also sort of trained by our culture to diminish the imagination and to pretend that it doesn't affect us and pretend that it's a child's plaything. When I think the opposite is true. The reality of it is our imagination forges our perception.
Forges our life, forges our civilization.
Yeah, for sure.
And that everything that we ordinarily call real, unless we are a meditator or a psychonaut or have had some other rare life-changing experience.
Like yerba mate.
Yes. Everything is a child of imagination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so much unnecessary suffering and confusion comes from misrepresenting these imaginary constructs as truth. And in incoherism, I believe Remy Boyer is pointing with art to a way of holding a reality in a way that can be translucent to these productions of imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm reminded in a totally different direction of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, where there's a clear light that we come from and return to. And, what you mean we? There is no we in this particular case, but provisionally we say we come from and return to. And in the intermediate stage, we have all of these visionary productions that sooner or later, except in rare exceptions, compel us into rebirth. And it's originally called the Bardo Todal, pardon my Tibetan pronunciation.
I wasn't going to say anything.
And Bardo, I'm led to understand, means threshold or interval. And in this case, they mean the threshold between lives, but it's also threshold in every sense, that when you go from one rune to another, that interval is a bardo.
It's the liminal space.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the to be able to penetrate between the productions of imagination is also a kind of bardo. And in Remy Boyer's writings, in this book in particular, he often refers to the interval. And this is that same idea that if we are emphasizing the, say, space between things rather than things, it's a way of stepping outside of these constructions, of stepping outside of these coherences. And the incoherent is a move to liberation, both in a way that we can understand immediately, and also, I think, liberation in the sense that the Tibetan Buddhists mean it in the context of the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Interesting. I noticed in the piece that the excerpt that you sent me, one of the pieces was a poem that was referencing some Hindu stuff, too. And
there's a great deal of Hindu material in here, Buddhist material, some, and things of all world traditions. But yes, especially there's a great deal of interaction between Shakti, the goddess, and the god, sometimes Shiva, but also Shiva is called Shambhu. And that's a very common name that is used here, the interaction between Shiva and Shambhu as very intimate lovers. And this recalls, the authorship is given as Remy Boyer in syzygy with Sylvie Boyer climax. So his wife is his muse, and the interaction between them is enormously creative and profound.
Mm-hmm.
And you get the sense that so much of this is an expression that is coming from a place of deep connection between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And when they write about the god and the goddess, when they write about Shambhu and Shakti, there is a metaphysical expression, but it also is a very intimate personal one.
That's really fascinating. Let me ask you a slightly more technical question. Syzygy usually means three bodies in alignment.
Mm-hmm.
What is the third body?
Yes, that's a good question.
You have to read the book to find out. And then sit with it for 30 years. So tell us a little bit more about some of the context, because, it says texts. Some of it is verse, some of it is not. There are hymns, there are sayings, there's a hidden king. That's kind of cool.
Yes. And I'll come back to that shortly.
Okay.
But most of it is in the form of, what would you say, adages, or moments of reflections of wisdom that, I think you could go back to ancient Egyptian wisdom literature,
mm-hmm.
or the golden verses of Pythagoras, to have these bong idea,
mm-hmm.
bong idea,
mm-hmm.
bong idea, and they form an architecture of guidance.
Okay.
And that is the predominant form, but there are also manifestos going back to the surrealist manifestos, the futurist manifestos,
mm-hmm.
of artists saying, beyond notice, world, we have this artistic vision and nothing is ever going to be the same again. So it's intended to be a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay.
There are two of these in here, the Incoherist Manifesto N17.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense. Well, it is incoherism. Maybe it does or maybe it doesn't. Which at one time was called the first Incoherist Manifesto. And the other one, do I remember the title of it? You'd think I'd spent almost a year translating this. It would be at the tip of my tongue. Incoherist Manifesto K22, which has also been called the second Incoherist Manifesto. So that's another form. And then there is directly poetry.
The Incoherist Manifesto K22 does have what looks like 22 aphorisms.
Ooh.
So I don't know about number 7. I don't know about and 17 though.
17 is an important number in Sebastianism.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I guess that's a sign we should probably talk about that, although it's one section out of many.
Okay.
But it is one of the most lovely, and it's possibly the one that is most closely connected to the initiatory traditions.
Just tell me that it doesn't involve getting shot with a lot of arrows.
It's not that Sebastian.
Oh, okay.
So this has a lot of parts. It's all the heritage of the visionary Portuguese tradition. And this is something that Remy Boyer finds very inspiring. Evidently, he's been involved with other people in the Sebastianist current, and he's here to tell the world about it.
Okay.
I believe that the beginning is a Portuguese shoemaker named Bandara, who writes these prophetic texts that are influential and on the edge of heretical. And then in the next century, there's an Antonio Vieira, sorry, Portuguese people, who looked back at this material and saw it as a prophecy of Portugal's destiny, and in particular, and I think this is in the original Bandara material, but Vieira brings it forward, the prophecies in the book of Daniel about the four empires, that the fifth empire is to be Portugal.
Okay.
And this begins this fifth monarchy idea that spreads all over the place. There was apparently a fifth monarchy sentiment among the Puritans that I haven't even begun to investigate. But in Portugal, it really took off, and it was combined with the ideas of Joachim de Fiori, that there was an age of the Father that was the era of the Old Testament, an age of the Son that was the era of the New Testament, and there would be an age of the Holy Spirit. And for Bandara and for Vieira, the Fifth Empire would be the age of the Holy Spirit, led by the ascension of Portugal.
Oh.
So this was, and then, this became associated with this mysterious lost and future king, Dom Sebastian, who was a young Portuguese king, who went out to battle against Saracens and disappeared.
Never came back.
And so the conventional understanding was that he died in battle. And so that gave the opportunity for, I believe it was Spain, to take over Portugal, which they resented deeply, naturally. But then there came to be the idea that the death of Sebastian was a myth propagated by the Spanish and by the Vatican, and that there's all this evidence, like the Magruder film, but like with suggesting that Sebastian was still alive and that he was going around trying to work for Portugal's liberation, and it gets very, very involved.
There's a mysterious Saracen on a grassy knoll.
Right. You get the idea. Or a papist or whatever.
Right.
And, they're all Catholic, but, Vatican envoy. And so this becomes, Sebastian becomes the mystical king who will return. And usher in the age of the Holy Spirit, usher in the Fifth Empire. And so there was already that whole heritage, and then there was a Portuguese poet, 20th century, you may have heard of Fernando Pessoa. He wasn't well known in his lifetime, but he died, and they discovered boxes and boxes of unpublished stuff, and they came to realize what a genius he was. And possibly his masterpiece was called Messagem, the message or messenger. I should have looked that up. And it brings out the whole Sebastianist mythos, and makes it contemporary for our time in a spiritual sense and a metaphysical sense and in an initiatory sense. And it brings all of those threads in this incredibly powerful way. And then Remy Boyer brings that forward in a few different works, most principally the Hymnal to the Hidden King, 17 Sebastianist hymns. And the 17
the king.
Yes, the Incoherism Manifesto N17, the 17 refers to all of the 17s that are found in the Sebastianist mysteries.
Oh man, that sounds really cool.
It is extremely cool. It's cooler than it sounds. So these hymns are really powerful poems, describing and praising the figures of Sebastianism, and in some cases, devotionally singing their praises. Oh, and of course, there's another manifesto. I completely forgot. There's the Sebastianist manifesto at the beginning of it.
Manifesto.
Yeah, so we're gonna Sebastianist you, it is both spiritual, and yet it takes like the heritage of what human beings have done specifically in history, and elevates it into the spiritual realm.
I just want to read this one little piece of the Sebastianist Manifesto that my eyes sort of fell on, and I was like, oh, this is good. Sleep, dream, awakening. absence and the emptiness of the person, permanence of the real, that in which I sleep, in which I dream, in whom and by whom I awaken. Which, just that one little bit sounds so much like the non-dualist stuff that we were talking about before, like just encapsulated in the, I mean, it's also poetic and weird. Like,
yes. So this is definitely coming from a particular view, a particular voice. Even as the modality changes, there's a continuity.
Yeah.
But the beauty of the hymnal to the Hidden King moved me as soon as I encountered it, and it continues to move me deeply. There's a second hymnal in the book, the hymnal to the goddess, which is composed of 33 hymns to different aspects of the divine feminine. And all of those are very beautiful. They can be very healing, but they are particularly transcendent. I don't mean in the sense that it doesn't touch us materially, but it's bringing us into a visionary domain that just dissolves all that we have and know. And so it forms an interesting complement to the hymnal to the Hidden King, which also elevates us, but it elevates us with our history and with the glories of the past. And so they form kind of bookends in this really interesting way.
This sounds like a really fascinating work. All right, I want to talk about something a little bit more mundane, which is the fact that this book is like 3 times the size of any of the other Remy Boyer books. You said you worked on it for a year. This sort of writing that is not only half verse, but fairly mystical and kind of abstract, I know that it can be much more challenging to translate. How did you tackle the challenge of translating verse?
Sure. Well, I've translated some of his verse in past books, but not on this scale. To start with, my goal is to have the words not get in the way. I try to have a sense of the thrust of the piece, and then the first version of the words tumble out, and it becomes apparent where there are blockages.
Okay.
And then you have to massage and massage and massage until then you finally have the sense that this is as clear as it can be. And then just keep moving, and then coming back to it pass after pass after pass, and at a certain point realizing, no, I gotta call up the author and clear up certain things.
I guess it helps that the author lives.
Yes. For some of the historical pieces I've done in earlier books, I didn't have that luxury. It's just a sort of a sense of trying to make everything about the book be a clear vessel for the book's mission.
Okay.
And that includes how the words fall out.
All right.
But of course, I'm going to be reflecting on this and hopefully deepening in my understanding of it. So it may be that as the years go by, I'll find that there are ways that the translations could be enhanced. So, it's possible in 10 years there could be a new revised edition. But, I've done the best I can with the understanding I have at this point.
Oh, I totally understand. Have you ever in the past dabbled in writing poetry in your native language?
A little. I've never been entirely... I've had some doggerel that I've written for entertainment that I'm still very pleased with.
Yeah.
The stuff that's aspiring to more artistry, I've never been satisfied with, although I've gotten good feedback on sometimes.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So you had experience with poetry already when you got into this. So you kind of already, a little bit, but enough to get you started.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then, did you, do any research into other, translators of poetry? Like I've read a little bit, some of my favorite poets are non-English speakers. So I've read like some forewords from, poetry translators and heard them talk about what they were doing. And it sounds like, I don't know, it just sounds like there are a lot of challenges in it. So it's impressive that you, that for the largest work of his that you've translated so far, there's so much verse in it and so many, I don't know. I mean, just that one little piece that I read, like that would have taken me a week to figure out what the heck was going on there.
Well, I'm helped that Remy Boyer is an exceptionally clear writer.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes have to translate works of other writers within the books,
mm-hmm.
and no one is as clear.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are absolutely gnarly. The Martinist writer Robert Amadou,
mm-hmm.
He's almost completely incomprehensible. And yet, if you can get in there with enough effort, there's great material there. But it's rough. And most people that I've tried to translate are somewhere in between. But Rémi Boyer, I think that he is so clear in his intention and dedicated to not cluttering up the language,
mm-hmm.
and putting things in a way that is you almost have to try to misunderstand it.
I bet it probably helps a lot also that you've spent so much time with his writing that you probably have a very good understanding of his voice.
I'd like to think so.
Uh-huh. Well,
but the reason that I selected him in the first place
mm-hmm.
is that I have things that I want to see in the world,
uh-huh.
and I don't always feel as if I have the best instincts for how to communicate that directly.
Mm-hmm.
But this writing says what I would want to say if I could say it much better than I could myself.
I have come across writing like that before, and it feels like coming home.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's it.
How do you foresee readers interacting with this text? Do you foresee it being something that is read through front to back? Is it something that needs to be that you're expecting people to sort of dive into randomly, like in the middle? Like how is the average reader expected to work their way through this book?
I think going through it in a way without structure or preconception was only appropriate.
Incoherent. Well, I like that. That's cool.
But I also think that it's inevitable that if this isn't a sensibility that speaks to you pretty immediately,
mm-hmm.
that it's not going to be something that's to your taste.
Right. Okay.
But then if it is, it can be a true adventure.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of, I don't know if you've ever seen Withnail and I, the classic British comedy.
I don't think I have.
At a certain point, the Withnail, who is an extremely rude, bohemian English out-of-work actor, is listening to someone go on about something, and he just, at a certain point, sneers and says, "What absolute twaddle." And I fully expect a good chunk of people will open this book and go, what absolute twaddle.
I like it. Excellent. A
little bit about Tantra, perhaps.
Yeah, I would like to ask about that. So, about 2/3 of the way through the book, there is a section of the Kamala Sutra.
Yes.
And there are lots of very interesting drawings. It says that they've been sketched at the temples in Khajuraho, India in September of 2010. But there are these great sketch drawings along with these little poems. Can you talk a little bit about this part?
Sure. I think that when people imagine the photos or drawings that they've seen of the erotic statues in Indian temples, these are the ones they're thinking of. That particular temple there, which I was just looking it up. Apparently, the erotic ones are only like 10% of the statuary of that temple, but those are the ones that get all the photos. They're the most insta-ready. So these were started off as sketches, and Remy Boyer took them and wrote the poems to illustrate the art. But that is a natural extension of his interests because of the intimate relationship he has with his muse, of the intimate metaphysical realization of the principle of Shakti and the principle of Shiva. And so being able to have those correspondences in a devotional, adoring, passionate language was a natural match. And so I feel that there's like an intuitive power there that can reach people in a way that maybe other parts of it might not. And there's a lot of talk usually about Tantra versus Neo-Tantra. How when we think about Tantra popularly, we're thinking about fancy contemplative sex,
right?
And experts in actual Tantra are hasten to point out that is little or none of what we mean by Tantra. But I think in the case of this, it's both. It is not as if Remy Boyer is unfamiliar with Abhinavagupta, the one of the great sages of non-dual Shaiva Tantra, or other writers of authentic Tantra, of for instance, Dzogchen and Mahamudra as advanced kinds of Tantra. Where we're talking about a way of understanding one's true nature, not by separating oneself from the sensory lived experience, but using that sensory lived experience as tools for realization in a way that is said by Tantra practitioners to be much more effective and direct than simply keeping out the sensory world. And in some manifestations of that kind of Tantra, but a small minority, the Tantric authorities always want to add, there are practices of physical intimacy that are used because they are so intense. They can be used as a tool for realization. And that came over during the 60s to become sacred sexuality, which Tantra practitioners want to insist is something else entirely. Some of them will say that's valid. It's just not what we mean by Tantra. And some people will go, that is complete indulgence and has nothing to do with spirituality at all. My take, and this doesn't reflect on anything that Remy Boyer has said, is that it's not something that helps us recognize our true natures, but it is a way to bring our lived experience of sexuality in relation to a deeper layer of being.
Okay.
But I would say in the case of the Kamala Sutra and the teachings being expressed there, it's a little from both pools.
Okay, interesting. So, did you know before you started getting into this work about Remy Boyer's interest in Eastern philosophy, Eastern schools of mysticism? Or
well, that was there in the very first document.
It was okay.
Yeah. There were references to practices that I recognize from Dzogchen Buddhism.
Oh, okay.
But put in a context that was more, closer to Kabbalah and alchemy and Gnosticism.
Okay.
But you wouldn't have gotten it that way if you hadn't been exposed to Eastern non-duality at all.
Are you continuing to work on more Remy Boyer material? Do you have another book that you're working on now?
I am working on things for my own use, but my next project for publication is not Remy Boyer. Finally, I'm moving on to a different author.
Gasp!
An author who was recommended to me by Remy Boyer.
Oh, okay.
And there's a Jungian Swedenborgian from Belgium named Claude Bruley, who Remy Boyer always describes as a man whose work was ahead of its time. And he had 4 books, and my intention is to translate them all in draft form, all 4 of them at once, and then go back and finish and publish each of them in turn.
Okay.
So it's going to be keeping me busy for a while.
Yeah. Have you taken a look at them yet?
Yes, they're fascinating.
Do you feel like you have enough of a background in Jungian and Swedenborgian stuff to know what you're looking at, or is it leading you down more rabbit holes of research and learning?
To tell you the truth, I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
I do have the at least the resource that although the author himself is no longer with us, he has 1 or more daughters.
Okay.
Who are around. And I may have some questions for them, and I'll have questions for Remy too, who was the person who got them published in their native French.
Interesting. Oh, that sounds like a really fascinating topic and a very. It sounds like a new challenge for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
All right, so this book, did you? You obviously did the book design on it. It looks very nice.
Thank you.
I can tell that your skills have improved as you've gone along. Like this has a very modern look to it that it looks like a professional did it. So
thanks.
Well done. Did you self-publish?
Yes. I mean, well, basically, yes. I did all the layout and I wrangle the print-on-demand service, and so forth. I do work in partnership with Rose Circle Books, who publish a lot of Martinist and Freemasonic and other Western mystery tradition works, directed by the wonderful translator and publisher Piers Vaughan. And so he, when I contacted me originally to get some tips on how I might go about this, and he graciously offered his publishing imprint and access to his audience to give us a leg up.
Sweet.
And so this is a Rose Circle publication. There's the little symbol at the base of the spine of it, of all the books.
Unsurprisingly, it is a rose in a circle.
Yes.
So this will be available for sale the same place all your other books are.
Yes, waysofawakening.com. Also, it's available on Amazon, but I'm very annoyed that for some reason the cover image shows up as image not found. I'm trying to get that fixed. But I mean, you don't have that problem if you go to Powell's, the cover is there. If you go to Barnes & Noble, the cover is there. But Amazon, I guess they're too busy mangling Tolkien to keep their eye on getting customers' covers right.
Oh, God, that TV show.
Yeah, it's rough.
Well, this has been a really fascinating talk. I'm really looking forward to getting into this book. It looks like, it looks like an amazing way to spend a week trapped in a cabin by snow.
That's one of the use cases for sure.
So I'll make sure that there are links to the book and your website, which is, say it one more time,
waysofawakening.com.
So those are going to be in the show notes. And also I will put links to your previous interviews in the show notes so that people can find all your stuff. Do you have any further things that you wish to add about this text or your work on it at the moment? Like,
I just encourage people, if they find this book, or if they go out about their day, to be ready to walk between the raindrops and note the interval.
And be a little incoherent.
I don't know what you mean.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for being my guest yet again, while I am your guest.
Enjoyed it.
This has been another episode of the Arnemancy Podcast. Thank you for joining me. I have been your host, Reverend Eric. You can find Arnemancy online at arnemancy.com, and you can subscribe to this podcast anywhere podcasts are found. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting the Arnemancy Project for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/Arnemancy.
This is Vanessa Urena, and I'm really excited to announce my new store, Sword and Scythe, where I will be offering magical art, materia, and services beneath Mars and Saturn. You can visit the store at swordandscythe.com and be sure to sign up for the email list to receive early access to new releases.